Hello, and
Live.
hello, and welcome to The Pouch, the abandoned cockatoo feather of podcasts that helps the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Greg. Maybe we should get some fake crowd noise for our podcast. Savage.
And I'm Jake. You stole my freaking joke. Far Wharton. You came pretty close anyway.
I did too.
And I'm Jake. Is that canned audience cheering in your pocket, or are you just happy to see the return of televised sport? Far Wharton. On today's episode, we talk about cabinets, reconciliation, borders, and so much more.
And Jake, while we're snug as a bug in this proverbial rug, I would just love to have a bit of a chat about the pay rise freeze that happened with New South Welshmen and women today.
Yep.
And
New South Wales people.
You know, just find out your opinion on whether or not that is enough. Are we doing our bit for the coronavirus?
I think when you put it in context of there are a whole range of businesses who have either enforced or asked for staff to take a pay cut in order to essentially get their business through that tough time of the coronavirus lockdown and the shutting of many shops and businesses. When you put it into that context, it seems entirely reasonable that staff, that public servants would also take a pay cut or at least a pay freeze.
Yeah, you were just meant to say a joke.
Oh, okay.
But now this is all serious. Now we're not even living up to our catchphrase. Oh, dear me. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I think it's one of those things where people are going to have to sort of dig a bit deep and really figure out what it is that they how this affects them. Right? They're going to be saying, well, this is not fair. This is fair. I suppose I don't really want to delve too deeply into a personal opinion about it, being a public servant and all. However, I would like to stress that all my opinions are my own and not reflection of the company or organisation I work for. The two interesting things for me about this pay freeze, right? There's a pay freeze for public servants in New South Wales over 1 year. And I've heard two interesting comments about this. The first interesting comment is that it negatively affects the people in rural New South Wales, which I thought was interesting. Now, the way that it works is that the government is saying that they're going to be funneling the money that they're saving from the pay freeze into infrastructure. And most of the infrastructure projects which have been flagged are going to be built in the city, which provides jobs and obviously things in the future for the city as well, as opposed to the infrastructure projects being put into the rural areas, which means that it negatively affects the rural areas. So essentially,
is that because they don't have as many rural infrastructure projects?
Exactly what it is.
Okay.
So essentially, they're getting the same freeze as someone who lives in Sydney, but someone in Sydney actually might reap the benefits of what's actually happening.
They're getting more amenities out of it.
Yeah, and also even just in the economy, right? Like the person who gets the job is going to be from Sydney, so essentially there's this whole sort of cycle happening with that money. But the people in the rural areas, they just get a pay freeze, it essentially ends up being a pay cut. Which I thought was pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting take on it, and not something that I thought about.
By the way, I thought of a joke.
Oh, good.
Well, as a public servant in Queensland, I highly endorse public servants in New South Wales getting a pay cut because it wholly and solely does not affect me. No, look, that's fair enough. I wonder how much the bushfire recovery, which largely did affect rural New South Wales, rural and remote New South Wales. I just wonder how that plays into it, because of course, after a bushfire, after a major disaster, there is invariably a lot of money that goes into rebuilding, i.e. infrastructure, which, one would think that is being funded out of the money that was put aside for the bushfire recovery by the federal government. So I wonder whether this discussion about there being more infrastructure projects in city New South Wales than in rural is made up for by the fact that there are already these rural infrastructure projects that are slated at that are targeted towards bushfire recovery. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't actually know what the specific projects are. I just sort of know that they're more targeted towards the city, but I don't actually know the names of the projects or specifically where they are.
Barry.
Yeah. Yep. We'll have to Google it, Jake. We'll have to get into some serious
speed Googling.
Yeah, some serious journalism. Goodness me. We don't want to go down that path because, we're not so serious, are we?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and we did a great episode the other day. If I think I'm allowed to say that about our own podcast.
Toot your own horn, Greg. Toot your own horn.
I'm tooting it right now, and
That's what you're doing.
We did a good news episode, and gosh, I had fun.
So did I. It was a great news episode. I think it was uplifting.
Yeah.
I felt good after it.
Yeah.
I decided actually during the show, and I took action afterwards, that I was going to get rid of all of my unlidded Tupperware, and it was a very profitable session. I think all of Thursday I spent getting rid of those lidless Tupperware containers, and I no longer have any.
Well, you'll have to. For those of you who don't get the joke, you'll have to go back over and listen to the good news episode. It's one of those episodes you can listen to at any time of the day. Midnight. Anyway, my point here is that we had a good time. One of the stories that we spoke about was the NRL going back.
Yes, and, National Rugby League.
Yeah, and then they did, and they had some fake crowd noise, and it was the first thing that stuck out to me. And I thought that's kind of good. I'm okay with it because I thought, and I was speaking about this with a few people today, we all agreed, because they know not to disagree with me, but they all agreed that...
Otherwise, you will receive a rant for the next 30 minutes at the water cooler.
Yeah, because I have thought about my opinions. And that it was better, it was weird, but it was better with it than without it, was the basic consensus. How did you feel?
I think fairly similarly. At the risk of disagreeing with you. No, it was weird. At the very beginning, I thought it was weird. But then I suppose the main things that I was considering was that at that elite level of sport, there is a certain amount, I feel as though you are buoyed on by the cheering. Like I used to play team sport. I played rugby for years, and one of the greatest things was when you're sprinting for a try. I never sprinted for a try. I was a front rower, so I was the meat, not the person that runs with the ball with the great hair. Yeah. But when the fullback or the halfback is sprinting for the try line and the crowd starts cheering and you can hear it, it buoys everyone. It's totally uplifting. So immediately I went to, wow, this is it's uplifting sounds, but it's canned audience reactions. So like as people were running for the try line, it got louder and more enthusiastic. So it was just a little bit robotic and weird, but still.
It was funny because I had this image, rather than of the crowd cheering, I had this image of someone sitting there with the sliders going, "Ooh, got to use this slider and up and down, and then not too much. Oh, no, that wasn't a try, and then that was a bit tricky. Ooh,
the exact same thing.
Almost they have to almost be as reactionary as the commentators themselves. So I don't know. I'd like to put my hand up for that job, to be honest with you.
It'd be a lot of fun, I think.
I think I can do it. I think I've got the skills. I think this podcast has given me the skills. Jake.
Greg.
That is the wax lyrical section of the podcast where we just sort of chat. Now we get into the serious stuff.
Yep.
Hard-hitting stuff. Our first story.
Stuff. Speaking of being hardly hit or hit hardly, no. Being
COAG.
Hit very hard.
COAG. So now this is backtrack a little bit. What is the so this is a story about COAG has been disbanded as of today.
You didn't read my
No, I
joke
didn't.
line,
Okay,
Greg.
I'll go back. Ready?
It was a
COAG.
tremendous joke line.
Oh, I don't know what it is. What's heparin before we get into the joke?
Well, heparin is an anticoagulant
Ah,
or an anti-coag
this is going to be funny. Okay, ready? Hang on.
to a very small number of people. It is going to be very funny.
Put my joke voice on. Jake, COAG has had a serious dose of heparin.
Oh, that's a delightful joke.
That's very good.
Somebody clearly spent a lot of time.
I think, yeah. I think I've got. Hang on. I do have some. Anyway, I can't find it. I do have some fake crowd noise with me. But anyway, okay. What is COAG?
Well, COAG is the Council of Australian Governments, and it is, essentially since 1992, it's been a forum for state and territory leaders to work with the federal government on matters of policy, funding, and et cetera, et cetera. And it has been, essentially a monthly, sometimes quarterly, and depending on the portfolio. So, there's regularly a Treasurer's Forum, and there's a Health Ministers Forum, et cetera, et cetera. Those people will gather together, but because of the I suppose the agile nature of what we needed, or what the federal government needed in reaction to the COVID response, they formed this thing called the National Cabinet, which again it's made up of those same state and territory leaders and groups of people from each of those states and territories. For example, the state and territory treasurers, state and territory health ministers, and potentially chief health officers, etc. And their federal colleagues, they all got together under this thing called the National Cabinet, which we looked at in one of our deep dive episodes. We did indeed.
One of our shallow wade episodes.
It was indeed. But interestingly enough, so because the COAG, or the former COAG, used to meet roughly once every month, or sometimes a little bit less often. Interestingly enough, because of the frequency at which they have had to meet over the COVID response, they have met more times over the last 2.5 months than PMs and premiers and chief ministers have met in the last 10 years. Can you believe that, Greg?
I can't believe it. It was a very bipartisan meeting too, wasn't it? Is COAG less bipartisan or more bipartisan?
Well, I mean, I would say that it is relatively bipartisan. I mean, when you think about bipartisan, you're thinking about two partisan states or two partisan positions that are coming together over a single issue and agreeing on that issue. This is not. I mean, when it comes to the state premiers and chief ministers, they are a mix of Labor and Liberals.
Yes.
Formerly Greens in
so
Tasmania.
it might be about as equally as
well, yeah, it's a mix.
Is it tripartisan?
It's certainly. I suppose the reason I'm hesitating on that is that they often come to COAG or indeed the National Cabinet in the future, because part of this story is essentially COAG has been disbanded and they're going to continue the National Cabinet essentially with a bit of a revised governance structure, but when it came to COAG previously, quite often the premiers would come to COAG and say, "I've got this particular thing that I need to work on. I need the federal government to agree on. Let's work together. Let's get it done." And the federal government would quite often say, "No, not going to happen. Sorry, we're not budging on that." Yeah. And it might be a big thing like, GST funding, for example. The Western Australian government regularly went to COAG and said, we need a bigger amount of the GST revenue. We need a bigger amount of things like, GST revenue is a big one because they bring in so much money, out of GDP for their minerals exported to China and other countries. So, they have a leg to stand on when they say we want a bigger slice of the pie because that pie is
contribute a lot.
Slice. Okay. Exactly. But invariably, so I suppose back to your question, is it bipartisan? It has been during the COVID response.
Yeah.
When things go back to business as usual and premiers have their single their policy issues or their funding issues, and they're very specific and they have a position and the government holds a different position, that's when we'll go back to that business as usual politics where they'll have a doorstop interview. They'll say, this is the thing that I'm taking to the COAG or the National Cabinet this week, and I'm going to fight for Queenslanders, or I'm going to fight for New South Welsh people, or I'm going to fight for et cetera, and they'll have to have that discussion with the other premiers and chief ministers as part of that thing. But it's really good. I think the Prime Minister has said it's going to be, the new structure is going to have less paperwork, essentially less bureaucracy, greater communication. They're going to streamline those endless meetings, he said, so that we can bring it back to one focus, creating jobs out of the back of this crisis. So there you go.
Yeah. So jobs are a bit of a theme for this week, aren't they, Jake?
Yes, jobs and growth. I mean, the jobs and growth is sort of the coalition, what do they call it, byline that they've always sort of had. They've always taken it to every election.
Yeah.
Jobs and growth.
Now, this is on the back of him announcing that there's going to be some industrial relations changes as well. And it would be remiss of us, Jake, to not discuss that a little bit. I'm not too good with it. I suppose from my perspective, I sort of get what's happening, but he hasn't been too clear on the specifics of it. Scott Morrison hasn't been too clear on those specifics of it. Basically, my understanding is that they want a little bit of industrial relations reform to be able to give employers a bit of more flexibility for hiring employees by the time that this whole COVID situation, on the road to recovery. So he's getting people together who wouldn't otherwise have gotten together and have never been together before, to try and get them in the same room. I think his motto is something like, I'll provide the room, you provide the answers, or something. And basically they're able to nut out what they would like to see happen going towards a COVID-free future, or at least a new sort of normal, as Q&A often call it. So a few interesting comments on that. One of my favourite ones has been about the fact that it's actually a Liberal government would have been the most likely to make this happen, because if a Labor government tried to get everyone together from I'm guessing it's the unions versus sort of the employer representations, that if the Labor had tried to get those people in the same room, Liberals just would have been like, that's not happening, that's never happening, we're never coming into the same room as the union people, blah, 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 blah. Whereas because it's Liberal actually doing it, Labor people and union people actually have to come in and give their 2 cents about what's happening. So I thought that was interesting. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But the idea that it was only a Liberal government who could bring these two sides together was an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, off the bat, it has happened once before. I mean, the last time that it happened in a major way was with Paul Keating, who was a Labor government.
Yeah, okay.
Labor Prime Minister. And, I can't remember the name of it. It might have been the Keating Accords or something. It's like something big noting.
That's catchy enough.
Exactly.
But essentially the Paul Accords.
And that's exactly what they did. They pulled the cord and it worked. So essentially that was bringing together industry, business leaders essentially, and employees and union officials. When it came to that particular thing, they had I can't recall the slogan that they used essentially, but it's something to the order of nobody should end up worse off. Essentially, that's I can't remember the exact slogan, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
But with that, when Keating brought these these key figures into the room together to have these key industrial relations discussions, he had things like universal childcare, maternity leave, other things like that to offer. Yeah. Whereas the current government, the current federal parliament does not have those things to offer these groups. So essentially, it is going to need to be a negotiation of how do we employ the most people possible without putting, overly onerous impositions onto industry. Essentially, how can we make this as easy as frickin' possible for business to employ as many people as possible? How can we make it as easy as possible for business to employ as many people as possible? And part of that likely is going to be, I think, this is the reason they're sort of, the government is just saying, I'm just going to provide the room and you guys are going to go sort it out. I'm going to do a little bit of moderating, but you guys are going to sort it out. I think the reason for that is, part of this is Australia has had very stagnant wage growth for a very long time.
Okay.
However, we have also seen a complete decimation of – we have. Yeah, absolutely. We've also seen a complete decimation of our manufacturing industries.
Yeah, right.
And manufacturing used to be the stalwart industry that people would get employed into, but unfortunately, we are invariably too expensive to do to do manufacturing when we have places like China that can pay their workers bugger all, and they could just make trinkets all day.
Okay, I understand. I get the gist of that. I think one of the interesting things is that Scott Morrison is not committing to saying that no worker will be worse off,
of course,
during this time.
Of course.
Do you think that's... I try and think about why that is and what the reasons might be for that. Why, what are the good reasons for that?
The good reasons for that is I feel that is preparing us, i.e. the common citizens, to take some form of adverse thing as a response to these meetings. But I don't know what those things are. They may relate to, I think, I personally think it relates to wages.
Yeah, okay.
But it may in fact be conditions.
Yeah.
So they've already wound back things like penalty rates, weekend rates, those sorts of things.
Yeah, they did.
How much further can you go for, lower paid workers?
We will find out, Jake. We will find out. It's just it would be such a shame if we came out of this COVID situation without really, I don't know, trying something a little bit different, trying something a bit radical. I suppose from maybe the Liberals' perspective, the radical thing is that everyone's in a room chatting with each other, all these people who otherwise wouldn't be. So maybe it's all about relationships and feeling all warm and fuzzy. So
I mean, that is something that is incredibly positive to come out of this. Is invariably we have spent so long with this frankly just silly relationship between business and unions.
Yeah, okay.
There has for enough time, it's been enough time where the businesses want to make a change.
Yeah.
And that change may, increase productivity, increase output, may, improve customer relations, et cetera, all of these outcome-based things. But they may impact on workers' lives in this particular way, or they might slightly change the scope of work or their scope of practice, et cetera, et cetera. And the union just basically says, no, sorry, it's not happening, and we take care of 40,000 people who walk off the job tomorrow if you try to change that condition. The relationship between industry and unions is farcical, and it will be great to see neutral ground where we come together over a common theme of we need to make things better so that more people can be hired in the wake of this COVID crisis or in the wake of the COVID recovery. So, it'd be interesting to see what comes out of it.
And I think that, underlying confidence that the government brings in their focus on jobs for the near future, Jake. And speaking of jobs, we have a few people who are fighting for the Eden Monaro electorate. And this is riveting. I'm thinking, Jake, I'd love to do... my dream is to do a daily show of a podcast, and I was thinking maybe the Eden Monaro election might be our first chance to do that, maybe a 3-dayer in a row or something. But that, Jake, is all beside the point. This week... Liberals decided that they were going to put forward their candidate, a Dr. Fiona.
Yep.
And
Dr. Fiona Kotvos.
okay, I tried to find a little bit about her. I couldn't find too much about her. They seem to like her on Facebook. She good,
Yeah.
Jake?
Well, I mean, that's a relative. I can't really provide an answer on whether she is good or not, because it's probably a subjective thing. By all accounts, she's a very productive member of society. She's been a former teacher. She's a former scientist. She's a small business operator, and she previously contested this same seat against Mike Kelly, who has just retired from Parliament.
And narrow margin were used. Narrow margins were used.
Indeed, it was a very narrow margin.
Yes, I know.
On a two-party preferred basis. But and also Scott Morrison was full of praise. He was saying, quote, "I'm so pleased that she received that overwhelming endorsement by of our local party members. This is someone who knows how to get things done."
Yes.
Now, the other bit of news here in the Eden Monaro seat is that they have chosen the date of July 4th to hold the election for that seat.
Very patriotic.
Exactly. Yes. Very patriotic for Americans. But the interesting thing here is most of the time we don't choose a school or school holidays or public holidays, etc., to hold an election.
No.
But they've decided to do it this time, essentially to enable to enable officials to, once they've counted the votes and once they've counted the ballots and everyone's done their voting, the officials will have enough time to thoroughly sanitize the polling booths.
Oh, literally, they've got to wipe them down.
Apparently it's a much more intense sanitizing regime than just cleaning them down.
Yeah, okay.
I think they get the high pressure hoses out, put some soap and suds in there as well.
Insane. That's
and all of that sort of stuff. But I mean, if you think about it, like Eden Monaro isn't a massive in terms of population, but it is a big geographically a big seat.
Yes.
But any like very small public school that might also be a polling booth, there might be 500 people going in there to vote on the election day. So that's 500 people. Any one of them could be carrying COVID. Exactly. Well, not anymore, I'm afraid. But no,
yeah, this is
certainly
terrible.
not.
This is getting worse.
Yeah, no democracy.
I've had enough of this
sausages.
COVID situation.
Bring me back my Bunnings sausage.
Yeah, isn't that a shame? Isn't that a shame? All right, well, we're gonna try and think about ways in which we can bring you the coverage of Eden Monaro around July 4th. That gives us over a month, Jake, to try and figure that bad boy out. That'd be fun, If we did like a daily recap of things that have happened.
Yeah, I'm getting a helicopter. We're going to report on the traffic congestion in the lead up to the election. Can you get a car park? Can you get a car park the day of the election?
Absolutely.
Which polling booths are easier to access?
Who missed a
little bit of mowing? We can think of all of these local issues. Exactly.
Where are the
best places to podcast?
Best roundabouts in Eden Monaro, and who's going to fix them?
Great question.
It is a great. Who's bald?
Me.
You're not bald. Now, Jake, I am curious to know what our tonight's mascot, thinks about the Eden Monaro. What they think about what is their opinion on Fiona what is it?
Kovjos.
Is it really? Kovjos.
Kotvos.
Kotvos.
That's
rolls
I believe
off the
it.
tongue.
Yeah, exactly. So tonight's mascot is the State Puff Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters 2 or 3.
I don't know.
Anyway,
you've just annoyed someone.
One of those.
Yep.
One of those. Anyway, yes. If you look at his face very closely, he looks very, very unhappy. Very unhappy.
He's so unhappy that he made me laugh in a way that I've never laughed before, Jake.
Internally.
He was. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Puffy Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters 2 or 3. We appreciate your take on what's happening in Eden Monaro, and he's not happy.
Not happy at all. Didn't say what he's unhappy about. Whether it's the candidates, whether it is the fact that people are still being forced to go to polling booths, regardless of whether there might still be members of the public that are symptomatic or asymptomatic of COVID.
Well, it's a mystery, Jake. That's the beautiful thing about him is you just get to project your own unhappiness onto him, and it comes back at you like a reflection.
Yes.
In the wind.
Indeed. In the wind. A reflection in the wind.
Jake, speaking of reflections in the wind.
Yeah.
Queensland. Their autonomy is under threat. I didn't know they were autonomous. I thought that they're a bit like a younger brother who looks up to the older brother of New South Wales and goes, "What's happening there? Oh, they're doing this, are they? All right, well, we better do that. Do they got a bridge? Do they? Well, we better get a bridge."
No. So
they've got a gallery of modern art. We better get a gallery of modern art. They've got beaches. We'll start shoveling in some sand from the desert. Make our own beaches. We'll show them.
Yeah. Now we got 6 of them.
Yeah. So
for Queensland's 1,000.
Is this about? I don't know what this story is about. Is it about? It's not about. It's got nothing to do with the fact that Clive Palmer is suing the borders.
Well, yeah, it's what a great concept too. How can you sue a border? Am I right? Yes. Well,
if anyone can, though.
If anyone can, Clive Palmer can. Yeah, it is a little bit to do. I mean, Clive Palmer is suing the Western Australian government for them, keeping their borders closed. But this is more specifically about Queensland borders, and what's going on there. Because of course, last week we discussed Peter Dutton's commentary on the Queensland borders remaining closed, and more specifically, Peter Dutton saying that, not so much explicitly, but certainly implicitly saying that Queensland Premier should stop taking guidance from the state's chief health officer and should instead start taking advice from him. Well, I did
too. I started sneezing on my hands.
Yes, exactly. I like it.
Do you?
I don't get it.
I don't. Well, I stopped taking advice from medical officers and just started.
I get it. I get jokes. This week.
If you don't laugh, was it really a joke?
Good question. Great question. But no, this week we saw the rhetoric over the border closures intensify with Queensland Senator Anthony Chisholm. Accusing the federal government of, quote, coordinating an attack even on Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk's border closures ahead of the state's election in October. Because Miss Palaszczuk has repeatedly said that she would rely on the advice from the country's longest-serving chief health officer, Jeanette Young, when it came to deciding what to do with the state borders.
Yeah, right.
And Senator Chisholm said that there had been an escalation of attacks in the last fortnight. Quote, there obviously is a concerted effort on the Conservative forces to target the Premier, he said. Quote, I can't say that they have co-opted the New South Wales State Premier's office, but I can certainly think it loudly. No, he said, but it certainly fits the agenda that I think the feds want to pursue. And then we also saw it step up another notch when Senator Pauline Hanson demanded the opening of the borders by Thursday of this week, which, of course, is now passed.
She missed that, didn't she?
We did. One of them. Certainly one of them.
Yeah.
But the One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson, has imposed a, quote, deadline of Thursday on the Queensland Labor government
or else
to lift border restrictions in the state or face constitutional challenge to the closures in the High Court.
Yeah, she quoted a particular part of the Constitution. I was going to look it up. It was 62 or something, she said.
Yeah, 39 I think it was.
Right, yeah. Whichever one.
Both of them.
Doesn't matter, really. Yeah.
Exactly.
Did you look it up? Do you know what it is?
No.
What does it say?
I don't. But what I can tell you, I can't tell you, but what I can tell you is that constitutional scholars have unanimously remarked that the border closures are either not described in the Constitution or enable the states to maintain their autonomy over their borders.
Yeah, well, when she said it, I was like, she said this is about Article 39 of the Constitution. I was like, well, I'm not looking it up, am I? Like, I was going to. But you're just like, all right, that sounds pretty good. So I'm glad that there's a constitutional scholar to tell me. That saves me having to look it up, doesn't it? Which is good.
Absolutely. It is always funny when you see people who. I'm going to assume that Pauline Hanson has never read the Constitution.
I wouldn't.
Do you think it's a safe assumption? No, it's
not
maybe not a safe assumption.
I don't think so.
Right.
I think she's smart enough to go and read the Constitution and be quite well.
Not
I would say she's quite well versed in it.
I would say she doesn't care about it. She's more concerned with the views of ordinary Australians, her people, which is fine. I wasn't insinuating that she wasn't smart. I was more insinuating that she just doesn't care.
Okay. All right. I'll take that. So what's happening next? Where do we see this going?
Did I save myself? Far out.
Where do we see this going? More importantly, Jake, where do you see this going?
I mean, look, it's an interesting thing. I dare say that the more people try to attack Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier of Queensland, who has said repeatedly that I will follow the advice of the Chief Health Officer, I think the more that people step up their attacks, the more she has to resist that and continue to rely on the advice of the Chief Health Officer, because to lower the borders, or to reopen the borders, and still disregard the advice of the Chief Health Officer would be to counter pressure, and that is not something a premier should be doing. That is not something that any political leader should be doing.
No, one of my favourite comments from this week came from Charlie Pickering on the Weekly, when he was talking about one of the ships, I think in Western Australia, where there was about 6 or 8 crew members or whatever who were
it's up to 40 now, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this won't be released until Sunday, so let's go with 608.
100.
Yeah. A number of cases from a ship that landed in Western Australia anyway, and he said, here we are in a situation where Pauline Hanson is begging for the borders to be open, and I'm begging for the boats to stop. He goes, I can't believe I found myself in this situation. So, that's
crazy.
Yeah, very funny, very funny. It's great when people are able to make some lighthearted comments. About this sort of stuff. But we're going to tackle something serious now, Jake.
Yes.
The Reconciliation Week, a very important week in Australia's calendar. Interestingly enough, starts on a Wednesday. So usually these sorts of things start on a Sunday.
Start on a Monday?
Monday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Starts
on a Wednesday, finishes on a Wednesday, I think. Something like that.
Yeah. But probably a Tuesday, because that'd be a week, wouldn't it? I don't know. Anyway, I
don't do maths, Jake.
The Reconciliation Week, this particular Reconciliation Week that occurred this week, marks 20 years since more than 200,000 people marched across Sydney Harbour Bridge.
Yes.
I was one of those people, funnily enough.
You were not.
No, I was.
You were not.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I went with my mother, and we walked across the bridge. Yeah. No, we were absolutely part of that.
Well, that's very noble of you, Jake.
It wasn't a noble thing. It was a matter of solidarity. So
solidarity's noble, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. I suppose so. I suppose definition-wise, if you want to use an actual definition, then yes.
I don't want to get into a discussion about the hierarchy of emotions with you, Jake. I just...
Because right now I've only got one emotion.
All right. I'll move the mic away. Yeah.
No, I'm only kidding. Yes, this Reconciliation Week marks 20 years since more than 200,000 people marched across Sydney Harbour Bridge, calling for a treaty that would formally recognise the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their ancient connection with this land, with their land. That treaty didn't happen, and thus Australia remains the only colonised country without a treaty with their First Nations people, and we remain no closer to Indigenous reconciliation today. An interesting thing about this week, and it is a little bit coincidental, but the Australian mining giant Rio Tinto destroyed a culturally and archaeologically, I might say as well, significant site in Western Australia's Pilbara region, the site which contains 2 shelters that have been largely continuously occupied for as many as 46,000 years, held Aboriginal artifacts, including a 28,000-year-old marsupial bone tool, grinding and pounding stones, and a 4,000-year-old belt made of plaited human hair belonging to the ancestors of today's traditional owners of that land. So yes, on Sunday, a series of quick-fire booms echoed through the sacred place as mining giant Rio Tinto detonated strategically placed charges at its Brockman 4 mine. And within seconds, the Jukin 1 and 2 shelters were destroyed, rattled by a company that sees the place's richness not as an ancient story, but as the deposits of iron ore that run beneath the rust-red soil. The Putu, I'm gonna entirely butcher the traditional owners' their community's name, but the committee chair of that area of the traditional custodians, John Ashburton, said, quote, "There are less than a handful of known Aboriginal sites in Australia that are as old as this one, and we know from archaeological studies that this is one of the earliest occupied locations, not only on the Western Hamersley Plateau, but also in the Pilbara and nationally. Its importance cannot be underestimated, and now it's gone."
It's extra heartbreaking because it comes on the back of the bushfires as well, which destroyed some artifacts in the Carnarvon Gorge, I think it was. A lot of handprints and a lot of artwork on a particular rock that was burnt. And one of the very first things that they did was to get some experts in to see if it could be restored, and it couldn't be restored. So the bushfires have destroyed that. Rio Tinto have destroyed this. I mean, look, it's devastating enough that there would be some sort of, I imagine, natural, causes for their artwork and cultural relics to be destroyed, let alone, these natural disasters and then man-made disasters like this. It's just heartbreaking, and they work so hard.
It is.
People on the land there will work so hard to not only preserve it, but to promote it and to educate people about it. I'm devastated, Jake.
It's
my devastated face.
It is so unfortunate, and I'm not speaking for them, and I can't. I'm no authority on this sort of stuff. But those cultural sites are sites where they take their young, their kids to, and tell them about the stories of their ancestors, because these cultural sites are sites where they talk about their ancestors, how they came to be in Australia, how the land was created, et cetera, et cetera. All of their stories are often tied to these physical locations, and they have lost yet another location. It's it is just so unfortunate, and it's to have it happening on the back of Reconciliation Week is just, it's a double slap on the face, because it is a time for reflection of, what has occurred in the last 12 months. What have we done in the last 12 months to assist in reconciliation? Well, not a great deal positively.
No. All right. Well, yes. I don't know where to go from there. Look at my my thoughts go out to that whole community. It's absolutely devastating. We have now. I don't know where this story goes, Jake, but look, we have
goes all the way to China.
There's a lot of things happening with China. I have tried to keep up with it. I've been reading a lot of comments about the fact that what's Victorian Premier's name?
Daniel Andrews.
Yeah, that he's got some pretty tight connections with China. That that China basically. I mean, I heard one comment anyway. That this is possibly not fact, but anyway, one commenter who had significant authority, was saying that, often what they'll do is China will sweeten particular deals. They come in and they befriend you, and then they start talking about the fact that you're a friend of China, and we would love to give you money, and we would love to do all these things for you. And then all of a sudden, criticism of China starts, and then you have to be on the back foot of that one and start to say, nah, China's pretty good, actually. We're always going to be friends with China. And at the moment, there's a real sort of seesaw of political thought going around in the community versus... So on the one hand, you've got people saying, well, China's bad. That number of people seems to be growing. It's nowhere near as much as what we need for it to sort of topple over, but at the same time, that is growing. And but Daniel Andrews hasn't held back, and now we've got America involved as well. How am I doing? Have I given you something to work with?
That's really good.
Oh, good. Go.
It's really good. No, keep going. That was excellent.
No, that was it. That's all I got.
Okay, well, yes.
That's it. I'm done. I'm out. You're just going to do the rest of the podcast. I'm out.
It is quite interesting because last week's weekly show we discussed in some depth the I suppose the fact that coincidentally, with the fact that we have asked the World Health Organization, or we've asked the world essentially to get behind our request for a investigation into the coronavirus origins and its spread. Coincident with us asking for that, we have been essentially slapped with massive tariffs on barley imports.
Yes.
And to such a great degree that it's actually probably not all that great for us to continue to export barley to China. But it just so happens that roughly at roughly the same time that this 80% tariff came in, it was announced that America was just they were just ready. I mean, like, America was ready to export a whole bunch of barley into China at a really great price. Yep. And coincident with that, China essentially said, like, America, we've just imposed these tariffs on these Australian guys because they're not being so great with the way that they import the barley. But we really like you guys.
That's a great impression, Jake. It's fantastic.
We really like you guys.
You really captured the emotion involved in this.
I worked really hard on that. So China's all like, yeah, America, like I feel like you and I, like, we could be besties and we could do a whole lot of things to really streamline the way that you import your barley with us.
Yeah.
And so they did that. And what's happened now is essentially the Morrison government has asked China to grant Australia the same reduction in bureaucratic trade barriers that Beijing has promised to the United States. Because, of course, the request has emerged as exports warn the US that allies such as Australia could suffer collateral damage from a deal between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump to massively increase China's imports of American agricultural goods and energy products. So, yeah.
So this is okay. So just to I suppose summarize in my own head. So they're saying, hang on a second, you need to not be putting tariffs on us. You actually need to be giving us exactly the same price as what America's got.
So our tariffs were essentially because because China had accused Australia of dumping barley.
Yes.
At
and
a
if you don't know
much
what dumping
price.
is, go to our episode called China.
Exactly.
Where I actually get my head around it because Jake did such a great job of explaining it. So
I appreciate it. So yes, we were accused of essentially dumping bunches of or a huge amount of barley in the Chinese market and essentially outpricing our competitors. But because of this introduction of the tariffs, we are now at a significant disadvantage. But essentially, there is a process that you would go through to address these types of trade disputes, which China has agreed with America to totes streamline. So we essentially are saying we would like access to that same process of streamlining this process, either with the World Trade Organization or directly with China.
Okay. Well, this comes off the back of a study, a survey, which I was reading here in The Guardian. And it says it's by Paul Karp, just to give credit where credit's due. And the article was written on the 26th of May in 1986. And it said, no, I'm just kidding, it's 2020. More than half of Australians believe the Chinese government imposed trade sanctions in relation for China, leading calls for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID-19. So the poll actually suggests that. I mean, I would like it to be more than half.
Yeah.
Essentially. I mean, look, you
that's
can't. But
evidence,
anyway,
right?
I mean, look, a majority of Australians are sort of on board with the idea that China's doing this as a retaliation. However, it might not be, right? You're sort of suggesting that it might be a coincidence in that it might just be actually trying to help the US.
Oh, look, I think we saw this week many commentators saying that there was, this investigation. So the increase of the tariffs to 80% on barley, that was the result of a year-long investigation. So there's a really great chance that China was holding on to that for either an occasion where Australia did something wrong, i.e. asking for a inquiry and bullying, the world community into essentially asking for inquiry.
Yeah.
Or they were waiting for an occasion where, say, one of our international competitors had a better price or was able to, export more stock.
Let's go deeper, Jake. Let's go deeper. What if this is about helping Donald Trump win the election?
Oh, great question. How does that work?
Well, China says, hey, we'll get you some good deals. And then Donald Trump gets to say, hey, we got some good deals with China. Look, I'm helping the farmers.
Yeah.
Cha-ching.
Yeah.
Done.
Exactly.
Dang. He wins.
Exactly. No, look, I think that's entirely credible.
It's all Scott Morrison's fault.
I think that's entirely credible, but I suppose...
Is it?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, because look, it is the role.
Who knows how the wonders of the mind work, Jake?
It is absolutely the role of not necessarily the president, the leader of a country, but certainly those in foreign affairs, in trade, etc.
Yeah.
It is totally their role to source better deals for their constituents, for their country.
Yeah,
their country.
Absolutely. People. They're basically the CEO of the country, aren't they? They have to work in their best interest at all times.
Exactly. I'm not sure how well Donald Trump would align with that statement, but
great.
Anyway,
that's a different podcast. That's for the that's for the Politics Over Coffee boys.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. But it is one of those things that
tell us why we're wrong, boys.
Exactly. But it is one of those things that by doing something in this way at this time with China, the America has essentially hurt us. China has orchestrated it because they already had a provider of this stuff and decided to go elsewhere for it. But it is important to note, when there are international competitors and we are competing on an international market, the best price or the best product wins, and it is often the best price. So, anyway.
All right, Jake.
We finished off second best.
We did. We're a bit like the Broncos last night. Cha-ching.
So well done. Masterfully done, sir.
Boom, boom. Jake, when our viewers have finished adding crowd noises to their own lives, what would you like them to do?
I've got a 3-step plan to get us back to economic productivity.
Talk us through it, Jake.
Step 1, rate.
Yeah. What?
Step 2 is review.
Step 1, eat.
Rate.
Oh, rate.
I mean, yes, eat. Yes, I think you should eat. You should eat. Rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps us to get in front of the eyes and fingertips of other podcast people.
That's right. We certainly want to be in front of those fingertips, Jake. And if you want to send... I don't know what you mean. Oh, because I have to
You
press
know,
play?
when you're
Oh, right.
scrolling
Okay.
in the
Got
podcast
it.
player, you're looking for a new podcast. And I'm like, I need a new politics podcast. Scrolling down, I found it.
Do you scroll with your finger? I just scroll with my eyes these days. I just go like that and it
That's
scrolls
very good.
down.
What if you want to go to the next page?
I just go like that. Yeah. Do you not?
You know,
Everyone's
you had a
doing
very
that, Jake.
sophisticated iFriend.
Google it after this. Yeah. No, it's everything. My fridge.
Wow.
My kids.
The future is now.
And if you want to share the love, you can do so by telling your friends, families, and foes to head to thepouchofthepodcast.com, where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice. Maybe. I don't even know what all the podcast players are. You can get us on Apple and Spotify and Stitcher.
Pod Blast.
I think there's like Overcast.
Bling Blong.
Shing-a-da-ding. I think we should make a podcast play called Bling Blong because the amount of advertising we give it.
Yes.
Jake, thank you so much for chatting with me today. And I really, thank you for the good news podcast. That was heaps of fun. If you want to jump on board that one, you're more than welcome to. Super fun time. It's great to be able to sort of just say whatever the heck comes into my head and not feel bad about it. And thank you to those people who are watching on Facebook. Thank you to those people who are watching on YouTube. Please subscribe, like. Doesn't bother me, I just want you to do that.
It bothers
because
me.
Yeah, because otherwise Jake doesn't get any sleep tonight if you
Jake
don't
cries.
do that. So, yeah.
Jake cries.
Yeah, but yeah, you can check us out if you've had a bit of fun today. And Jake, you got plans for the weekend? You going surfing?
No surfing. No, I'm going to go do a trail run tomorrow and a bit of mowing, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, productive things. All right,
exactly.
Well, I'm just going to sit in my shed and edit the podcast. Don't worry about it. I don't need vitamin D.
Got a podcaster's tan.
Enjoy your weekend, mate. I'll see you very soon.
Thank you.